I thought the worst thing that could happen was my daughter posting my dance video online without permission. I was wrong. The worst thing was discovering why she really did it, and what she had been planning for months behind my back. When I saw her watching my follower count with that calculating smile, everything clicked into place. She wasn't trying to embarrass me. She was trying to steal everything I had built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 55, I never imagined I would become an internet sensation, much less through dancing. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and until 6 months ago, I was just another empty nester trying to fill the quiet hours after my youngest child moved out for college. My husband Miguel had been gone for 3 years now, claimed by cancer despite all our fighting and praying and hoping. The house in Phoenix felt enormous without him, echoing with memories of family dinners and birthday celebrations, and ordinary Tuesday evenings that I would give anything to have back. Dancing had been my salvation during those first impossible months after the funeral. I started with YouTube videos in my living room, teaching myself salsa steps that Miguel and I had always talked about learning together but never found the time for. At first, it was just about moving my body, about feeling alive in a world that had suddenly become gray and still. But something magical happened as the weeks turned into months. I discovered I had a natural rhythm, a grace I had never known existed within me. My daughter Isabella lived just 20 minutes away with her husband Kevin and their 2 small children. She was a marketing coordinator at a tech startup, always busy with campaigns and strategies and things I pretended to understand when she explained them to me over our weekly coffee dates. She was 28, ambitious, and had inherited her father's practical nature along with my stubborn streak. When she first saw me dancing in my living room during one of her visits, she laughed and said it was cute that I had found a new hobby. The transformation happened gradually. What started as simple YouTube tutorials evolved into hours of practice every day. I converted Miguel's old workshop into a dance studio, installing mirrors and buying proper equipment. I studied different styles, from salsa to bachata to contemporary fusion. My body changed, becoming stronger and more flexible than it had been in decades. My confidence grew with every mastered routine, every complex sequence I could execute flawlessly. Isabella began visiting more often, always with her phone in hand, recording little clips of my practice sessions. She said they were for the family group chat, to show everyone how active and healthy I was staying. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself looking forward to her visits, to sharing my progress with someone who seemed genuinely interested in my newfound passion. 6 months ago, everything changed. Isabella suggested I start posting my dance videos online, claiming that older women needed representation in social media spaces traditionally dominated by younger influencers. She offered to help me set up accounts, to manage the technical aspects I found overwhelming. Social media had always intimidated me, but Isabella made it sound simple, almost inevitable. We created accounts across multiple platforms under the name Dancing Carmen. Isabella handled everything from filming to editing to uploading, explaining that this would allow me to focus on what I did best while she took care of the business side. She was so knowledgeable about hashtags and algorithms and engagement strategies that I felt grateful to have such a capable daughter guiding me through this foreign territory. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My first video, a simple salsa routine performed in my converted garage studio, received thousands of views within hours. Comments poured in from people around the world, praising my technique, my energy, my authenticity. Older women thanked me for showing them that dance had no age limit. Younger viewers expressed admiration for my dedication and skill. The positive feedback was intoxicating after years of feeling invisible and forgotten. Within a month, my follower count had reached 6 figures across all platforms. Brands began reaching out through Isabella, offering sponsorship deals and partnership opportunities. Dance studios invited me to teach workshops. A local news station wanted to feature my story. Isabella managed it all with professional efficiency, negotiating contracts and scheduling appearances, while I focused on creating content and improving my craft. The money started flowing in amounts I had never imagined possible. Sponsored posts brought in thousands of dollars each. Workshop fees filled my bank account faster than I could process. Isabella explained that she was taking a standard management fee of 30%, which seemed reasonable given how much work she was putting into building my brand. She had quit her marketing job to focus full-time on my career, she said, and deserved compensation for the sacrifice she was making. My daily routine became structured around content creation. Isabella would arrive each morning with a detailed schedule of videos to film, outfits to wear, and promotional messages to record. She had strong opinions about everything from my makeup to my choreography, always pushing for content that would maximize engagement and reach. Sometimes I felt like I was losing control of my own passion, but the success was undeniable, and Isabella assured me that this level of management was necessary for continued growth. The house filled with ring lights and camera equipment, professional microphones, and editing software. Isabella had transformed my spare bedroom into a command center, where she monitored analytics, responded to comments, and planned future content strategies. She spent more time in my house than her own, often staying late into the night working on promotional campaigns and brand partnerships. 3 months ago, I started noticing changes in Isabella's behavior that made me uncomfortable. She became secretive about certain business dealings, handling phone calls in private and password-protecting documents on her laptop. When I asked questions about specific contracts or revenue streams, she would deflect with technical explanations that left me more confused than informed. She assured me that everything was being handled properly, that my only job was to create content and let her manage the complicated business aspects. The first real warning sign came when I tried to access my own social media accounts and discovered that all the passwords had been changed. Isabella explained that this was a security measure, that my accounts had been targeted by hackers, and she needed to maintain exclusive control to protect my brand. She would show me the analytics and comments when I asked, but always on her devices, always with her interpretation of what the numbers meant. 2 months ago, I overheard a phone conversation that chilled me to the bone. Isabella was in the kitchen, speaking in low tones to someone she addressed as her business partner. She was discussing plans to gradually phase me out of my own brand, to transition the content toward younger dancers while maintaining the Dancing Carmen identity. She mentioned that older audiences were less valuable to advertisers, that the brand needed to evolve to remain profitable. I confronted her about the conversation, but she denied everything, claiming I had misunderstood a discussion about expanding the brand to include other dancers as featured guests. Her explanation sounded plausible, and I wanted to believe her, but doubt had been planted. I began paying closer attention to our interactions, looking for signs of deception I had previously missed. The second incident happened 3 weeks later. I was reviewing some paperwork for a major sponsorship deal when I noticed that the contract listed Isabella Rodriguez Chen as the primary.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Brand representative, with Carmen Rodriguez mentioned only as a featured performer. When I questioned this arrangement, Isabella explained that liability and legal issues made it easier for her to be the official face of the business while I remained the creative talent. The explanation felt hollow, but my understanding of business contracts was limited, and I reluctantly accepted her reasoning. Last month, everything came crashing down in the most unexpected way. I had been feeling increasingly disconnected from my own success, watching my passion become something I barely recognized. The joy of dancing was being overshadowed by the pressure to produce content, to maintain an image, to meet engagement targets that Isabella set without consulting me. I decided to surprise Isabella by learning to manage some aspects of the business myself. I enrolled in a social media marketing course online, determined to understand the world that had consumed my life. What I discovered during those first few lessons horrified me. The instructor explained how easy it was for people to steal identities online, to build businesses around other people's content, to gradually assume control of brands that didn't legally belong to them. The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Isabella had not been helping me build my career. She had been systematically stealing it, using her technical knowledge and my trust to create a business empire that existed entirely in her name. Every contract, every partnership, every revenue stream had been structured to benefit her while leaving me as little more than an employee in my own brand. I spent sleepless nights researching intellectual property law, business registration records, and trademark filings. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Dancing Carmen was registered as a business entity with Isabella as the sole owner. The social media accounts, despite being built around my content and persona, were legally controlled by her. Even the converted garage studio where I practiced had been photographed and documented in ways that could support claims of her creative contribution. The betrayal went deeper than I had imagined. Isabella had been planning this takeover from the very beginning, using her marketing expertise to build a trap that I had walked into willingly. Every piece of advice, every technical assistance, every moment of seeming support had been calculated to transfer ownership and control away from me and toward her. But Isabella had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated my intelligence, my determination, and my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. The same resilience that had carried me through Miguel's illness and death, that had motivated me to rebuild my life through dance, was about to be focused on reclaiming everything she had stolen. The war for my identity, my passion, and my future was about to begin, and this time I would be the one controlling the choreography. Isabella arrived at my house that Tuesday morning, with her usual armload of equipment and color-coded schedule, completely unaware that her months of deception were about to be exposed. She moved through my kitchen with the familiarity of someone who considered this space her own, setting up her laptop and reviewing the day's content calendar while I pretended to stretch and warm up for our planned filming session. The routine had become so established that she no longer felt the need to explain her plans in detail. She would simply announce which dances we were recording, which outfits I should wear, and which promotional messages needed to be filmed. I had become a performer in my own life, following directions for content that would generate revenue I would never fully control. This morning felt different because I was seeing everything through new eyes. Isabella's casual assumption of authority, her dismissive responses to my questions, her complete control over every aspect of what was supposedly my career. She had been so confident in her manipulation that she had stopped being careful about hiding it. As she connected her camera equipment and adjusted the lighting setup, I made my decision. Instead of following her choreographed plan for the day, I was going to give her something unexpected. Something that would force her to reveal the true nature of our relationship and provide me with the evidence I needed to reclaim what was mine. The dance I had been practicing in secret was unlike anything I had performed for the cameras before. It was raw, emotional, and entirely authentic in ways that my recent content had not been. More importantly, it was something Isabella had never seen, never approved, never had the opportunity to claim credit for creating. I moved to the center of my studio space and began to dance without explanation, without asking permission, without following the script Isabella had prepared. The music came from my phone rather than her professional equipment, a song that held personal meaning she could never understand or manipulate. Isabella's immediate reaction told me everything I needed to know. Instead of encouraging my spontaneity or celebrating my artistic expression, she became agitated, demanding to know what I was doing and insisting that we stick to the planned content. Her concern was not about my well-being or creative fulfillment, but about maintaining control over a situation that was slipping away from her. When I ignored her protests and continued dancing, she began filming anyway, probably calculating how she could edit the footage to fit her narrative. But I was counting on that reaction. I needed her to record what happened next, to create evidence of her own deception that she couldn't later deny or manipulate. As I danced, I began speaking directly to the camera, sharing thoughts and feelings I had been suppressing for months. I talked about the joy of rediscovering dance after loss, about the unexpected blessing of connecting with audiences around the world, and about the importance of authenticity in a digital age filled with manufactured personas. Isabella tried repeatedly to interrupt, to redirect my monologue toward more marketable content, but I continued speaking from the heart. I mentioned specific experiences and insights that were deeply personal, elements of my story that belonged to me alone and could never be replicated or stolen by someone else. The final moment came when I looked directly into the camera and said the words that would change everything. I talked about the difference between building something yourself and having someone else build it around you without your permission. I spoke about the importance of controlling your own narrative, your own brand, your own future. Isabella's face during this speech was a mixture of confusion, anger, and panic. She realized that I was deviating from her script in ways that could threaten her carefully constructed plans. But she also couldn't stop recording, because the content was undeniably powerful, exactly the kind of authentic material that generated massive engagement and revenue. After I finished dancing and speaking, Isabella immediately began discussing how she would edit the footage, which parts would work for different platforms, how she could maximize its commercial potential. Her response confirmed what I already knew. She saw my most personal artistic expression as nothing more than content to be monetized and controlled. That evening, after Isabella had left with her equipment and footage, I began implementing the plan I had been developing for weeks. I had been secretly documenting every aspect of our business relationship, every contract and agreement, every instance of her claiming credit for my work or making decisions without my consent. I had also been building relationships with legal professionals, business advisors, and other content creators who had experience with similar situations. The online course in social media marketing had connected me with a network of people who understood the industry from perspectives Isabella had never shared with me. My research had revealed that Isabella's control over my brand was not as absolute as she had led me to believe. Many of the contracts could be challenged, especially since they had been negotiated without proper legal representation on my behalf. The business registration and trademark filings contained irregularities that could be disputed. More importantly, I had discovered that my audience was more interested in my authentic story than in the polished content Isabella had been producing. The comments and messages I had been secretly reading revealed a community of followers who appreciated my genuine personality and real experiences, not the manufactured image Isabella had created. The next morning, I put the first phase of my plan into action. Instead of waiting for Isabella to arrive with her scheduled content plan, I filmed and posted my own video using equipment I had purchased secretly. The video was simple, authentic, and completely under my control. I introduced myself directly to my audience, sharing my real story without Isabella's editing or interpretation. I talked about my journey from grief to rediscovered joy, about the blessing and challenge of unexpected success, and about my commitment to maintaining authenticity even as my platform grew. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My followers responded with enthusiasm to seeing me speak directly to them, sharing personal insights and genuine emotions rather than carefully scripted promotional content. The engagement rates were higher than anything Isabella had achieved with her polished productions. When Isabella arrived later that morning and discovered what I had done, her reaction revealed the true nature of our relationship. She was furious that I had posted content without her approval, worried about how it would affect her carefully planned content calendar, and concerned about maintaining consistency with the brand image she had created. Her anger was not about protecting my interests or supporting my creative expression. It was about maintaining control over a business asset she considered her own property. The mask had finally slipped, and I could see her for what she really was. The confrontation that followed was unlike any conversation we had ever had. Isabella demanded to know why I had deviated from our agreed-upon process, why I had undermined her professional expertise, why I was jeopardizing the success we had built together. But her language revealed the fundamental problem with her perspective. She consistently referred to it as our success, our brand, our business, despite the fact that it was built entirely around my talent and persona. When I pointed out these inconsistencies, when I challenged her assumptions about who controlled what, Isabella's responses became increasingly desperate. She claimed that I didn't understand the complexities of the industry, that I would destroy everything without her guidance, that I owed my success entirely to her management and marketing expertise. But I was no longer the confused, grateful woman who had accepted her explanations without question. I had been educating myself, building my own expertise, preparing for this moment when I would need to stand up for my own interests. Isabella's condescending explanations no longer had power over me. The final straw came when Isabella threatened to shut down all my social media accounts if I continued posting content without her approval. She claimed that this was necessary to protect the brand, but her willingness to destroy my connection with my audience rather than share control revealed her true priorities. That threat was also Isabella's biggest mistake. It forced me to research the legal ownership of my accounts more thoroughly, and what I discovered gave me the leverage I needed to fight back. Despite Isabella's control over passwords and administrative access, the accounts had been created using my personal information, and the content was based entirely on my intellectual property. I had grounds to challenge her control, especially with the documentation I had been secretly gathering. More importantly, I had been building an alternative platform that Isabella knew nothing about, a backup plan, everything we had built together, rather than negotiate a fair resolution. Her actions also provided the clearest possible evidence of her control over accounts and business relationships that should have belonged to me. Every canceled contract, every locked account, every severed partnership was documentation of her power to make unilateral decisions about my career. My lawyer was delighted with the evidence Isabella was creating through her own vindictive behavior. I activated the backup plan I had been preparing for weeks. My alternative social media accounts went live with a carefully crafted message explaining the situation to my audience. I didn't attack Isabella personally or share private family details, but I was honest about the business dispute and my determination to maintain authentic connections with my followers. The response was overwhelming and immediate. My followers began migrating to the new accounts in massive numbers, bringing their enthusiasm and support with them. Many of them shared their own stories of being betrayed by people they trusted, creating a community of mutual support that was more meaningful than anything Isabella had built. Brands that had been working with me through Isabella began reaching out directly, wanting to understand the situation and explore continuing their partnerships under new arrangements. My lawyer fielded these inquiries, helping me structure deals that gave me complete control while providing fair compensation for my work. Within a week, my new platform had attracted more engaged followers than my original accounts had maintained. The content I was creating independently was performing better than the highly produced videos Isabella had been managing. Most importantly, I was enjoying the creative process again, finding joy in dance and connection that had been missing from the manufactured content of recent months. Isabella made several attempts to reconcile during this period, but her overtures were focused on protecting her interests rather than acknowledging the harm she had caused. She wanted to negotiate a partnership that would allow her to maintain some control and revenue share, but she was unwilling to admit wrongdoing or transfer ownership of assets that rightfully belonged to me. I was no longer interested in half measures or compromise solutions. Isabella had demonstrated that she couldn't be trusted with any level of control over my career or my creative work. The only acceptable resolution was complete independence, full ownership of my brand, and clear boundaries that prevented future exploitation. The legal process moved forward steadily. Isabella's attempts to claim ownership of my intellectual property were systematically dismantled by the evidence we presented. The business registrations she had filed were challenged and overturned. The social media accounts were recovered through platform appeals that demonstrated my legitimate ownership. Most satisfying was the response from my audience throughout this process. Instead of being confused or alienated by the business dispute, my followers became more engaged and supportive than ever. They appreciated my honesty about the situation, my commitment to authenticity, and my determination to maintain creative control. Many of them shared their own experiences with family members or business partners who had exploited their trust. The community that formed around my platform became a space for mutual support and empowerment, something much more valuable than the purely commercial relationships Isabella had been cultivating. 6 months later, I stood in my converted garage studio, now fully equipped with professional lighting and camera equipment that belonged entirely to me. I was preparing to film a special anniversary video, celebrating 1 year since I had started my journey into social media, and 6 months since I had reclaimed control of my own story. The Dancing Carmen original brand had grown beyond anything Isabella had achieved with her manufactured approach. My follower count had reached new heights, but more importantly, the engagement was authentic and meaningful. I was working with brands I respected, teaching workshops I designed myself, and creating content that reflected my genuine personality and interests. Isabella and I had reached a legal settlement that gave me complete ownership of all intellectual property related to my dancing career. She was required to transfer control of any remaining business assets and was prohibited from using my name or likeness in future ventures. The financial terms were confidential, but they included compensation for the revenue she had diverted from my earnings during her period of control. Our personal relationship remained strained, but I had found peace with the situation. Isabella's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced me to develop skills and confidence I might never have discovered otherwise. I was now a businesswoman as well as a dancer, capable of managing every aspect of my career without depending on anyone else's expertise or goodwill. The anniversary video I filmed that day was different from anything I had created before. It was a celebration of resilience, of the strength that comes from surviving betrayal and rebuilding on your own terms. I danced with a freedom and authenticity that had been missing during the months when Isabella controlled my creative expression. As I moved through the routine, I thought about all the people who had supported me during the darkest period of this journey. My son Marcus, who had stood by me despite his shock at his sister's behavior. My lawyer, who had fought tirelessly to restore my rights. My online community, who had followed me through platform changes and business disputes because they valued authentic connection over polished content. Most of all, I thought about Miguel and what he would have said about this entire experience. He had always encouraged me to stand up for myself, to trust my instincts, to never let anyone make me feel smaller than I was. His voice had been with me throughout the battle with Isabella, reminding me that I was stronger than I knew, and deserving of respect and fair treatment. The video ended with a message of gratitude to everyone who had supported my journey, and a promise to continue creating content that celebrated authenticity, resilience, and the joy of pursuing passion at any age. When I posted it, the response was immediate and overwhelming, filled with comments from people who had been inspired by my story and my refusal to accept exploitation. That evening, as I read through hundreds of supportive messages, I realized that Isabella's betrayal had ultimately led to something better than what I had before. I had discovered my own strength, built genuine relationships with my audience, and created a sustainable business that belonged entirely to me. At 55, I had learned that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to fight for what you deserve, or to refuse to be anyone's victim. The dance that had started as a way to cope with grief had become a platform for empowerment, both for myself and for the thousands of people who followed my story. I was dancing Carmen, but now I was dancing entirely to my own rhythm, on my own terms, with my own dreams guiding every step. And for the first time in months, that felt like exactly where I was meant to be. The morning after I discovered Isabella's true intentions, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had been clouding my judgment was gone, replaced by sharp focus and unwavering determination. I had work to do, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I was going to be the one in control. I started my day earlier than usual, before Isabella's typical arrival time. The first task was documenting everything I could access while I still had the element of surprise. I photographed every contract, every piece of correspondence, every financial statement I could find in the files Isabella kept in my spare bedroom. My hands shook as I uncovered document after document that revealed the scope of her deception. The business registration. That would allow me to maintain my connection with my audience no matter what she tried to do. The battle for my digital identity was about to begin, and this time I would be fighting on my own terms. Over the next 3 weeks, I executed the most carefully planned campaign of my life. Every step had been researched, every contingency considered, every potential response from Isabella anticipated. I was no longer the naive woman who had blindly trusted her daughter's expertise. I had become a strategist, fighting for my future with the same determination I had once brought to mastering complex dance routines. The first phase involved quietly securing my legal position. I hired an entertainment lawyer who specialized in intellectual property disputes, someone Isabella had never met and couldn't anticipate. Together, we built a case that demonstrated my ownership of the Dancing Carmen brand, despite Isabella's attempts to claim legal control. The documentation I had been secretly gathering proved invaluable. Screenshots of early conversations where Isabella positioned herself as my helper rather than my business partner. Records of my personal investment in equipment and studio space. Video evidence of me creating original choreography without her input. Bank statements showing that revenue was being generated by my content and persona. My lawyer explained that Isabella's control was more tenuous than she had led me to believe. While she had been clever about structuring certain agreements in her favor, the foundation of the business was built on my intellectual property, my image, and my creative work. With proper legal representation, I could challenge her claims and potentially recover control of what was rightfully mine. The second phase involved building an independent platform that Isabella couldn't touch. I secretly created new social media accounts under a slightly different name, Dancing Carmen Original, and began slowly building an audience there. I was careful not to violate any existing contracts, but I could legally share my story, my perspective, and new content that belonged entirely to me. This parallel platform served two purposes. It gave me a backup in case Isabella tried to shut down my original accounts, and it provided a space where I could speak directly to my audience without her editing or interpretation. The response from my followers was incredible. Many of them had noticed changes in my content and were excited to see me return to the authentic style that had originally attracted them. I also began connecting with other content creators who had experienced similar situations. The online community was full of people who had been exploited by managers, family members, or business partners who claimed to be helping while actually stealing their work. Their stories and advice gave me both practical strategies and emotional support for the battle ahead. The third phase was the most emotionally difficult. I had to confront the reality that my own daughter had been systematically betraying my trust for months. Isabella wasn't just a greedy business partner making questionable decisions. She was my child, someone I had raised and loved and trusted completely, who had chosen to exploit my vulnerability for her own financial gain. I arranged for a family meeting at my house, inviting not just Isabella but also her husband Kevin and my son Marcus, who lived in Denver but could join virtually. I wanted witnesses to whatever conversation we were about to have, people who could verify what was said and prevent Isabella from later denying or misrepresenting her words. Isabella arrived expecting a normal business meeting, probably planning to discuss upcoming campaigns and sponsorship opportunities. Instead, she found herself facing a family intervention that she was completely unprepared for. I began by sharing my concerns about our business relationship, asking specific questions about contracts, ownership structures, and decision-making processes. Isabella's initial responses were her usual dismissive explanations about industry complexity and my lack of expertise. Papers showed Dancing Carmen LLC established with Isabella Rodriguez Chen as the sole owner and operator. The address listed was mine, but my name appeared nowhere on the legal documents. I had been living in my own home while legally being nothing more than an employee in someone else's business built around my talent and persona. Credit agreements for the professional equipment filled my garage studio had been signed in Isabella's name, despite being purchased with revenue generated by my content. The insurance policies covering the equipment and the business operations listed her as the primary beneficiary. Even the trademark application for the Dancing Carmen name had been filed under her legal identity, not mine. Most disturbing were the emails between Isabella and various talent agencies discussing representation deals. She had been negotiating contracts for live performances, television appearances, and brand ambassadorships without my knowledge. The emails clearly positioned her as my manager and legal representative, with standard industry language about her authority to make binding decisions on my behalf. I photographed everything with my phone, creating a digital record that Isabella couldn't delete or destroy. Each document was another piece of evidence that she had systematically constructed a legal framework designed to exclude me from ownership of my own career. The planning involved was breathtaking in its thoroughness and chilling in its implications. After gathering the documentary evidence, I turned my attention to understanding the digital empire Isabella had built around my identity. I had been locked out of my own social media accounts, but I could still observe them from the outside, analyzing the content and engagement patterns with fresh eyes. What I discovered was a carefully constructed illusion of authenticity designed to maximize commercial value. Isabella had been editing my spontaneous comments and genuine emotional responses, replacing them with optimized content that tested better with focus groups. The woman appearing in recent videos looked like me and moved like me, but the personality being presented was a manufactured version designed to appeal to the broadest possible audience. Comments from my followers revealed their growing awareness that something had changed. Many mentioned missing the raw authenticity of my earlier content, the unpolished moments that had made them feel connected to my real story. Isabella had been so focused on professional optimization that she had lost sight of what made my content special in the first place. I spent hours reading through comments and direct messages, trying to understand what my audience truly valued about my work. Their words painted a picture of someone very different from the polished performer Isabella had been creating. They loved my vulnerability, my willingness to share struggles alongside successes, my genuine joy in movement that couldn't be manufactured or scripted. This research reinforced my growing conviction that Isabella's approach was not only unethical, but also counterproductive. In trying to control and monetize every aspect of my personality, she had been destroying the very qualities that made my content compelling. Her version of success was hollow and unsustainable, built on a foundation that ignored what actually mattered to the people who supported my work. The next phase of my investigation required more courage than I had ever summoned before. I needed to understand the full scope of Isabella's financial manipulation, which meant confronting the reality of how much money she had stolen from me over the past months. I called my bank and requested detailed statements going back to when my social media presence began generating significant revenue. What I discovered made me physically ill. The deposits from sponsorships and partnerships were substantially larger than the amounts Isabella had reported to me. She had been skimming from every income source, taking far more than the 30% management fee she had claimed. Revenue from workshop bookings, merchandise sales, and direct platform monetization had been flowing into accounts I had never seen statements for. Isabella had established multiple business entities, each one designed to capture different income streams, while maintaining the fiction that she was simply managing my career rather than stealing from it. The total amount of money that should have been mine was staggering. I calculated that Isabella had diverted more than $200,000 from my earnings over the past 6 months alone. The figure was so large that I initially doubted my own math, but repeated calculations confirmed the devastating scope of her theft. This financial betrayal cut deeper than the creative control issues, because it revealed the true mercenary nature of Isabella's actions. She hadn't been gradually corrupted by opportunity or tempted into poor decisions by circumstances beyond her control. From the very beginning, she had planned to steal from me systematically and comprehensively. Understanding the money trail also revealed vulnerabilities in Isabella's position that I could potentially exploit. Many of the financial arrangements she had structured were legally questionable, especially since they involved using my intellectual property and personal brand without proper authorization or compensation. The evidence I was gathering could support both civil and criminal charges if I chose to pursue them. But before taking any legal action, I needed to build a stronger foundation for independence. Isabella's control over my digital presence was so complete that losing access to my established platforms could destroy my ability to generate income or connect with my audience. I needed alternatives that she couldn't touch or manipulate. I spent the next several days researching new platform options and backup strategies. I created accounts on alternative social media sites, using variations of my name that were clearly connected to my identity, but legally distinct from the Dancing Carmen trademark Isabella controlled. These accounts would serve as lifelines if she decided to completely shut down my original presence. Building these alternative platforms required learning technical skills Isabella had always handled for me. I taught myself video editing software, studied algorithm optimization techniques, and researched audience engagement strategies. The learning curve was steep, but every new skill I acquired made me less dependent on Isabella's supposed expertise. I also began reaching out to other content creators who had experienced similar situations. The online community was filled with stories of people who had been exploited by managers, family members, or business partners, who claimed to be helping while actually stealing their work. Many of them had successfully fought back and were willing to share strategies and resources. These conversations were both educational and emotionally validating. I learned about legal precedents, platform policies, and industry practices that could help me reclaim control. More importantly, I connected with people who understood the unique pain of being betrayed by someone you trusted completely. One creator, a musician named Jennifer, whose manager had stolen her publishing rights, explained how she had documented evidence of unauthorized use of her intellectual property. Another, a visual artist named David, shared his experience challenging business registrations that had been filed without his knowledge or consent. Their stories gave me hope that recovery was possible and helped me refine my own strategy. A week into my investigation, Isabella began showing signs that she suspected something had changed. She started asking more questions about my daily activities, checking on me at unexpected times, and expressing concern about my mood and energy levels. Her increased attention felt invasive rather than caring, another form of surveillance designed to maintain control. During one of her visits, I tested her reactions by asking seemingly innocent questions about our business arrangements. I wanted to understand how she would respond when pressed for details she had previously avoided discussing. Her answers were evasive and contradictory, filled with technical jargon designed to confuse rather than inform. When I asked to see current contracts or financial statements, Isabella deflected by claiming that such documents were too complex for me to understand without proper training. She suggested that my questions indicated stress or confusion that might require professional help to address. Her patronizing tone and implicit threats were clearly designed to discourage further inquiry. Isabella's response to my questions confirmed that she had no intention of ever sharing real information or control with me. She saw me as an asset to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. Any future collaboration would be built on the same foundation of deception and exploitation that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. This realization eliminated any lingering hope I had harbored about finding a compromise solution that could preserve our family relationship while addressing the business issues. Isabella had chosen her path months ago when she decided to build her empire on my talent without my knowledge or consent. I was simply choosing to stop being a victim of her decisions. The emotional weight of accepting that my own daughter had been systematically betraying me for months was almost unbearable. I found myself grieving not just for the money she had stolen or the control she had assumed, but for the relationship I thought we had shared. Every memory of her supposed support and encouragement was now tainted by knowledge of her real motivations. Late at night, when the house was quiet and I could process my emotions without pretending everything was normal, I allowed myself to feel the full depth of the betrayal. Isabella hadn't just stolen money or business opportunities. She had stolen months of my life, forcing me to live as a performer in someone else's version of my story while the real me slowly disappeared. But alongside the grief came something unexpected and powerful. Anger, yes, but also a fierce determination to reclaim everything she had taken and to ensure that no one would ever again be able to manipulate me so completely. Isabella had awakened something in me that had been dormant since Miguel's death, the fighting spirit that had helped me survive every challenge life had thrown at me. I began planning my counterattack with the same methodical precision Isabella had used to build her trap around me. Every aspect of her control would be systematically challenged and dismantled. Every lie she had told would be exposed. Every dollar she had stolen would be recovered. And when I was finished, she would understand that underestimating me had been the biggest mistake of her life. 2 weeks after discovering the truth about Isabella's intentions, I was ready to begin fighting back. I had gathered evidence, built alternative platforms, consulted with legal experts, and prepared backup plans for every scenario I could imagine. Most importantly, I had overcome the paralysis that comes from discovering that someone you love has been systematically destroying your life. The first step was securing professional legal representation. I had researched entertainment lawyers who specialized in intellectual property disputes and family business conflicts. After several consultations, I chose Maria Santos, a sharp attorney whose previous clients had included musicians and artists who had been exploited by managers or family members. Maria reviewed all the evidence I had gathered and confirmed what I suspected about the weakness of Isabella's legal position. While she had been clever about structuring certain aspects of the business to benefit herself, the foundation of her control was built on intellectual property that clearly belonged to me. The fact that she was my daughter, and had acted without proper legal authorization, actually strengthened my case, rather than weakening it. We developed a multi-pronged strategy that would address both the immediate need to regain, but when I pressed for details, when I demonstrated knowledge I wasn't supposed to have, her confidence began to crack. Marcus, participating from Denver via video call, asked pointed questions about why Isabella had exclusive control over accounts that were built around my content. Kevin, who worked in finance and understood business structures, wanted to know why I wasn't listed as an owner or partner in a business that depended entirely on my work. Isabella's explanations became increasingly contradictory, as she tried to justify arrangements that looked increasingly indefensible under scrutiny. She claimed that she had been protecting me from legal liability, that the business structure was temporary, that she had always planned to transfer ownership once the brand was established. But when asked for documentation of these claims, she couldn't provide any evidence. The turning point came when I played a recording I had made of one of her phone conversations with her business partner. The conversation clearly revealed her plans to gradually phase me out of my own brand, to replace my content with younger dancers, while maintaining the revenue streams I had built. Isabella's reaction to hearing her own words was a mixture of shock, anger, and panic. She couldn't deny what she had said, but she tried to contextualize it as a misunderstood discussion about business growth rather than betrayal. Her explanations were weak and contradictory, and everyone in the room could see through them. Marcus was devastated. He had always admired Isabella's business acumen and had encouraged me to trust her expertise. Hearing evidence of her deception destroyed his faith in his sister and made him question everything he thought he knew about our family dynamics. Kevin was quiet throughout most of the confrontation, but his few comments revealed his growing understanding of what Isabella had been doing. As someone with business experience, he could see the legal and ethical problems with her approach more clearly than anyone else in the room. Isabella's final defense was to claim that she had been working tirelessly to build my success, that she deserved compensation for her efforts, that I was being ungrateful for everything she had accomplished on my behalf. But her argument fell apart when I presented evidence of how much money she had been taking from my earnings, how many opportunities she had controlled without my knowledge, how many decisions she had made without my consent. The meeting ended with Isabella storming out, threatening to shut down everything she had built and warning that I would be nothing without her management. Her threats only confirmed what I already knew about her priorities and her willingness to destroy my career rather than share control. But Isabella had underestimated both my preparation and my determination. Every threat she made had been anticipated, every potential retaliation planned for. The legal foundation I had built was solid, the alternative platform was ready to launch, and the support network I had developed was prepared to help me transition to independence. The war was far from over, but the first battle had been won. Isabella no longer had the element of surprise or my naive trust to rely on. From this point forward, we would be fighting on equal terms, and I was confident about who would ultimately prevail. 2 days after the confrontation, Isabella followed through on her threats. I woke up to find that all my original social media accounts had been locked, with messages claiming they were under review for policy violations. My email was flooded with notifications about canceled partnerships and suspended campaigns. Isabella was using her administrative access to sabotage everything she couldn't control. But instead of panic, I felt a strange sense of relief. Isabella's scorched earth tactics had removed any lingering doubt about her character or her intentions. She was willing to destroy my connection with millions of followers, to eliminate income streams that supported my livelihood, to burn down excitement about my return. Many followers shared their own observations about how the content had changed in recent months, validating my perception that Isabella's approach had been destroying rather than enhancing the value of my work. Their enthusiasm for my return demonstrated that authenticity was indeed more valuable than the polished but hollow content Isabella had been creating. The financial recovery process was more complicated, and would take longer to resolve completely. Isabella had hidden assets in multiple business entities and had spent significant amounts of the money she had stolen on personal expenses that would be difficult to recover. However, Maria was confident that we could recover the majority of the diverted funds through a combination of asset seizures, business dissolution procedures, and damage claims. The evidence we had gathered clearly documented the scope of Isabella's theft and provided a strong foundation for financial recovery. More importantly, the legal victories had broken Isabella's control over my career and established my right to operate independently. I was once again the owner of my own brand, my own content, and my own future. Whatever financial losses I couldn't recover would be a small price to pay for freedom from Isabella's manipulation and control. As I rebuilt my social media presence and reconnected with my audience, I felt a sense of authenticity and joy that had been missing for months. I was no longer performing for Isabella's cameras or following her scripts for optimizing engagement. I was simply sharing my genuine love of dance with people who appreciated both the art and the artist. The woman who had been gradually disappearing under Isabella's management was finally free to emerge again. And this time, I would never again allow anyone to assume control over my work, my voice, or my story. The battle had been exhausting and emotionally devastating, but I had won something more valuable than money or followers. I had won back myself. 6 months after beginning my fight to reclaim my career, I stood in my studio preparing to film content that was entirely my own creation, controlled by my own decisions, and generated for my own purposes. The legal battles were largely resolved, the financial recovery was ongoing, and most importantly, I had rebuilt my relationship with my audience on a foundation of genuine authenticity. Isabella had been ordered to dissolve the business entities she had created using my identity, and to transfer all remaining assets to accounts under my control. She had also been required to provide full accounting of all revenue she had received from my work, enabling us to calculate precise damages and pursue recovery of stolen funds. The process had cost both of us more than money. Our family relationship was permanently altered by the discoveries of her systematic deception and my determination to hold her accountable. But I had learned that some relationships are too toxic to preserve, regardless of biological connections or shared history. What I had gained was far more valuable than what I had lost. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, built skills I never thought I would need, and connected with communities of support I couldn't have imagined. Most importantly, I had reclaimed ownership of my own story and my own future. The dance that had begun as a way to cope with grief had evolved into something much more significant, a platform for empowerment, authenticity, and the radical act of refusing to be anyone's victim. And this time, I would be the only one deciding what steps to take next. The time for subtlety had passed. 7 months of careful investigation, legal maneuvering, and strategic planning had given me everything I needed to destroy Isabella's carefully constructed empire of lies. Now came the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating, the final confrontation that would expose her treachery to everyone who mattered and reclaim my life completely. I chose the setting deliberately, my dining room, where we had shared control of my digital presence and the longer-term goal of recovering financial damages. Maria explained that the process would likely take several months and would require me to document every aspect of Isabella's deception with forensic precision. The second step was establishing financial independence that Isabella couldn't sabotage. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution, ensuring that all future income would flow to accounts she had no access to or knowledge of. I also began the process of separating my personal finances from any business entities she controlled. This financial separation was more complex than I had anticipated because Isabella had entangled my personal assets with the business structures she had created. The equipment in my studio, the renovations to my garage, even some of my personal expenses had been run through business accounts she controlled. Untangling these relationships required careful documentation and legal guidance. Maria helped me understand which assets I could legally reclaim immediately and which ones would require formal legal action. The cameras and lighting equipment had been purchased with revenue generated by my content, even though the legal ownership might be disputed. The studio space in my garage was part of my personal residence, regardless of how Isabella had characterized it in business documents. The third step was the most emotionally challenging: preparing to confront Isabella directly while maintaining the element of surprise. I needed to document her reactions to being challenged, to create a record of how she responded when her control was threatened. This evidence could be crucial if the dispute escalated to court proceedings. I planned a conversation that would appear to be a routine business discussion, but would actually be a carefully orchestrated test of Isabella's honesty and intentions. I would ask specific questions about contracts, finances, and decision-making authority while recording her responses. Her answers would either prove that I had misjudged the situation or confirm the extent of her deception. 3 weeks after beginning my investigation, I put this plan into action. Isabella arrived for our scheduled content planning meeting, completely unaware that her months of careful manipulation were about to be exposed. She moved through my house with her usual confidence, setting up equipment and reviewing her agenda as if nothing had changed. I allowed her to begin her normal routine, discussing upcoming campaigns and partnership opportunities, while I observed her behavior with new understanding. Every casual assumption of authority, every decision made without consulting me, every reference to our brand or our strategy now revealed the true nature of our relationship. When Isabella paused to check her phone, I began asking the questions I had prepared. I started with seemingly innocent inquiries about specific financial details, requesting information she had always claimed was too complex for me to understand. Her initial responses were dismissive, filled with vague explanations designed to discourage further questions. As I pressed for more specific information, Isabella's demeanor began to shift. She became defensive when I asked about the legal structure of our business relationship, claiming that such details were handled by professionals and didn't require my direct involvement. When I requested copies of contracts I had supposedly signed, she promised to provide them later but couldn't explain why they weren't immediately available. The conversation reached a turning point when I asked directly whether I was listed as an owner of the Dancing Carmen business entity. Isabella's pause before answering was so long and uncomfortable that her response was unnecessary. When she finally claimed that ownership structures were complicated by liability issues and tax considerations, her explanation was so convoluted that it clearly revealed her deception. I continued questioning her about specific financial transactions, partnership agreements, and decision that portrayed me as mentally unstable and unable to handle the responsibilities of managing a successful social media presence. These posts claimed that I was suffering from stress-related confusion and that my recent behavior indicated a need for professional intervention and family support. The tone and content of these posts were so different from anything I had ever created that they actually strengthened my legal position. Maria pointed out that Isabella's own words were providing evidence that she was using my accounts to post content I had never approved, destroying the authenticity that had made my work valuable. More damaging to Isabella's position were the private messages she sent to my followers and business contacts. These communications, which we obtained through legal discovery processes, revealed her attempts to convince sponsors and partners that I was becoming unreliable and that all future business should be conducted exclusively through her. Several of these sponsors forwarded Isabella's messages to me, expressing concern about the situation and confusion about who actually had authority to represent my work. Their willingness to share these communications provided crucial evidence of Isabella's attempts to interfere with my business relationships and steal opportunities that rightfully belonged to me. Isabella's behavior during this period also revealed something I hadn't fully understood about her personality and motivations. She wasn't just someone who had been tempted by opportunity and made poor decisions. She was someone who felt entitled to control and profit from my work, who genuinely believed that her contributions justified taking ownership of everything I had created. Her communications with lawyers, sponsors, and even family members consistently portrayed me as an ungrateful and unrealistic person who didn't appreciate her sacrifices and expertise. She seemed incapable of recognizing that building a business around someone else's talent without their knowledge or consent was fundamentally wrong, regardless of how much work it involved. This insight helped me understand that there had never been any possibility of resolving our conflict through compromise or family discussion. Isabella's sense of entitlement was so complete that she couldn't imagine any arrangement where I would have equal authority over my own career. Any negotiation would have simply been another opportunity for her to manipulate and control. 3 months into the legal process, we achieved our first major victory. The trademark office rejected Isabella's application to register Dancing Carmen as her exclusive property, citing evidence that the name and associated content belonged to someone else who had not authorized the filing. This ruling established important legal precedent for the other aspects of our case and sent a clear message that Isabella's claims to ownership were not supported by valid legal authority. It also freed me to begin using my original brand name on the alternative platforms I had been developing. The social media account recovery process was more complex but equally successful. Platform administrators reviewed our evidence and determined that the accounts had indeed been taken over by someone who was not the original content creator. Isabella's administrative access was revoked, and control was transferred back to me. Regaining access to my original accounts was both thrilling and heartbreaking. I could see exactly how Isabella had been editing and manipulating my content, replacing authentic moments with manufactured performances designed to maximize commercial appeal. The comment sections were filled with messages from followers who had noticed the changes and missed the genuine personality that had originally attracted them. I posted a simple video explaining that I had recovered control of my accounts and would be returning to the authentic style of content that had built my following. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with thousands of comments expressing relief and making protocols. Each answer became more evasive and contradictory than the last. Isabella's growing agitation was obvious as she realized that I was asking questions she couldn't answer without revealing the truth about her manipulation. The session ended with Isabella claiming that my sudden interest in business details indicated confusion or stress that might require professional counseling. She suggested that I was becoming paranoid about issues I didn't understand and should trust her expertise rather than questioning arrangements that had made us both successful. Her response was exactly what I had expected, and exactly what I needed to document. Isabella's refusal to provide basic information about a business built around my work, combined with her attempts to pathologize my questions, created a clear record of her controlling behavior and deceptive practices. After Isabella left, I reviewed the recording of our conversation with Maria. The attorney was pleased with the evidence we had captured, noting that Isabella's evasive answers and condescending attitude would be damaging to any future claims about acting in my best interests. We were now ready to move to the next phase of our strategy: formal legal action to recover control of my intellectual property and financial assets. The process would be complex and potentially lengthy, but I was no longer the confused and trusting woman Isabella had been manipulating for months. I had become someone she had never expected me to be, an informed, determined adversary who understood exactly what she had stolen and was prepared to fight for every piece of it. The real battle was just beginning, and this time, I would be the one controlling the choreography. The following month brought a series of carefully orchestrated moves designed to systematically dismantle Isabella's control over my career and recover everything she had stolen. Each step was planned with Maria's guidance and executed with precision that matched Isabella's own methodical approach to building her empire around my work. The first major action was filing formal legal challenges to the business registrations and trademark applications Isabella had submitted without my authorization. Maria's research had revealed that many of these filings contained false information or failed to meet legal requirements for using another person's identity and intellectual property without consent. The trademark application for Dancing Carmen was particularly vulnerable because it was based on content and persona I had created entirely independently. Isabella had no legal claim to exclusive use of my name, image, or creative work, especially since she had obtained control through deception rather than legitimate business agreements. We also challenged the business entity registrations on grounds that they had been established using my personal information and residential address without proper authorization. The fact that Isabella was my daughter actually worked against her in this context, as family relationships don't automatically grant legal authority to use someone's identity for commercial purposes. Simultaneously, we began the process of recovering access to my social media accounts. The platform's policies generally supported original content creators in disputes with unauthorized managers or representatives. especially when documentation could prove that accounts had been taken over without proper consent. This process required providing extensive evidence of my identity as the original creator and performer featured in the content. Bank records showing revenue deposits, utility bills proving residence at the address where content was filmed, and testimony from witnesses who had observed me creating the work all supported my claims to legitimate ownership. Isabella's reaction to these legal challenges revealed the full extent of her desperation to maintain control. Instead of attempting to negotiate or compromise, she immediately escalated her efforts to damage my reputation and undermine my ability to rebuild independently. She began posting content on the original accounts, countless family meals over the years, where Isabella had first convinced me to trust her with managing my newfound success. The irony was perfect. The same space where she had woven her web of deception would become the stage for its complete unraveling. The guest list was carefully curated to maximize impact and ensure witnesses to everything that was about to unfold. Marcus would join virtually from Denver, his presence lending weight to the family intervention while keeping him safely distant from the emotional carnage. Kevin would be there in person, his business expertise crucial for understanding the financial implications of Isabella's actions. I had also invited my sister Elena, who lived in Tucson and had always been skeptical of Isabella's sudden transformation into a social media manager. Most importantly, I had arranged for my attorney Maria Santos to be present via video conference, ready to provide legal context for the evidence we were about to present. Her participation would make it impossible for Isabella to dismiss the confrontation as a family squabble or emotional overreaction. The morning of the planned dinner, I felt a calm that surprised me. For months, I had been living with the constant stress of discovery, the weight of knowing that someone I loved had been systematically destroying my life. Today, that burden would finally be lifted, regardless of the personal cost. I prepared Isabella's favorite meal with meticulous attention to detail. Arroz con pollo, made from Miguel's mother's recipe, fresh tortillas, and tres leches cake for dessert. If this was going to be our last meal as a family, I wanted it to be memorable for reasons beyond the devastation I was about to unleash. Isabella arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, punctual as always, carrying her usual equipment bag and wearing the confident smile that had masked her treachery for so long. She moved through my house with the casual authority of someone who considered it as much hers as mine, setting up her laptop and reviewing notes for what she assumed would be another routine business planning session. Marcus appeared on the laptop screen a few minutes later, his face already showing the strain of what he knew was coming. I had briefed him on the evidence we had gathered, but actually confronting his sister with proof of her betrayal would be agonizing for him regardless of preparation. Elena arrived next, embracing me with the fierce protectiveness she had shown since childhood. As the older sister, she had always been my defender against threats and challenges. Tonight, she would serve as both witness and support system for what promised to be the most difficult conversation of my life. Kevin entered last, his expression carefully neutral but his body language tense with anticipation. As Isabella's husband, he was potentially complicit in her actions, or at minimum had failed to prevent them. His reaction to tonight's revelations would determine whether he was victim or accomplice. Isabella surveyed the assembled family with mild curiosity, probably wondering why a routine business meeting had evolved into a formal dinner gathering. Her confusion was genuine, which confirmed that she had no idea her months of careful deception were about to be exposed in devastating detail. We began with casual conversation over dinner, discussing Marcus's work in Denver, Elena's recent retirement, Kevin's latest projects. The normalcy felt surreal given what was about to unfold, but I needed everyone relaxed and comfortable before dropping the bombshell that would shatter our family dynamics permanently. Isabella dominated the conversation with updates about my social media metrics, upcoming partnership opportunities, and strategic plans for expanding my brand into new markets. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her knowledge impressive, her vision seemingly unlimited. Anyone listening would have concluded that she was a devoted daughter, working tirelessly to support her mother's unexpected success. The performance was masterful, and I found myself momentarily questioning my own memories and evidence. Could I have misunderstood the situation? Was there some explanation for the documents I had discovered? some justification for the financial arrangements that had excluded me from ownership of my own work, but then Isabella casually mentioned a television appearance she had booked for me next month. A major morning show opportunity that would generate significant exposure and revenue. She described the interview format, the topics they wanted to discuss, the wardrobe choices that would photograph best on camera. What she didn't mention was that the contract for this appearance, which I later obtained through legal discovery, listed her as my exclusive representative with full authority to negotiate terms and collect payment. The booking fee was substantial, and according to the agreement, Isabella would receive the money directly, with no requirement to share specific amounts with me. This revelation crystallized my resolve and eliminated any lingering doubt about the confrontation I was about to initiate. Isabella wasn't just stealing from me financially. She was stealing opportunities, experiences, and recognition that belonged to me as the creator and performer of the content that generated all this value. After dinner, as we moved to the living room with coffee and dessert, I finally began the process that would end Isabella's control over my life forever. I started with a simple question that I already knew the answer to, but wanted her response documented in front of witnesses. Isabella, can you explain the legal structure of our business relationship? I want to understand exactly how ownership and decision-making authority are distributed between us. Her pause before responding was barely perceptible, but I caught it. For just a moment, her confident facade slipped, revealing awareness that she was entering dangerous territory. When she answered, her explanation was filled with vague references to liability protection, tax optimization, and industry standard practices. The response was classic Isabella, technically accurate in some details, but fundamentally misleading about the overall structure. She made it sound like the business arrangement was designed to protect my interests, when the reality was exactly the opposite. Elena, with her background in accounting, asked follow-up questions that Isabella struggled to answer satisfactorily. Why wasn't I listed as an owner of a business built entirely around my work? Why did I have no access to financial statements or decision-making authority? Why were contracts being negotiated without my direct involvement or approval? Isabella's answers became increasingly defensive and contradictory. She claimed that my lack of business experience made direct involvement inadvisable. She suggested that the current structure was temporary, designed to establish the brand before transferring more authority to me. She insisted that everything she had done was in my best interests, even if I didn't understand the complexity involved. Marcus, participating from Denver, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. If everything Isabella had done was legitimate and in my best interests, why had she never provided detailed documentation or included me in major business decisions? Isabella's response revealed the condescending attitude that had characterized her management of my career from the beginning. She explained that business operations were too complex for someone without formal training to understand effectively. She claimed that my involvement in detailed decision-making would slow down processes and potentially compromise opportunities. The implication was clear. Isabella considered me incompetent to manage my own career, despite the fact that it was built entirely on my talent, creativity, and personal brand. In her mind, I was simply the performing asset in a business empire she had constructed and deserved to control. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Isabella had just provided, in front of multiple witnesses, a clear statement of her belief that she was entitled to exclusive control over a business built around my work. Her words would be crucial evidence in any future legal proceedings. I reached into the folder I had prepared and pulled out the first piece of documentary evidence: the business registration papers that established Dancing Carmen LLC with Isabella as the sole owner. I placed them on the coffee table where everyone could see them clearly. Isabella, I said quietly, can you explain why these documents show you as the exclusive owner of a business that exists solely because of my work and uses my name as its primary brand identity? The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stared at the papers as if seeing them for the first time, though I knew she had filed them personally months earlier. Her face cycled through a range of expressions: surprise, calculation, defensiveness, and finally, resignation. Kevin leaned forward to examine the documents, his business training making him immediately understand their implications. Elena and Marcus waited for Isabella's explanation, their faces showing growing comprehension of what these papers meant. Isabella's response was predictable, but still shocking in its audacity. She claimed that the business structure had been recommended by her attorney as the most effective way to protect my assets and limit liability. She insisted that legal ownership was separate from beneficial ownership and that I was the real beneficiary of the business regardless of what the paperwork indicated. The explanation might have been convincing to someone without legal knowledge, but I had spent months educating myself about business law and intellectual property rights. Isabella's justification was sophisticated nonsense, designed to obscure the fact that she had stolen my identity and work to create a business empire that belonged entirely to her. Maria Santos chose this moment to join the video conference, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic in the room. As my attorney, her participation made it clear that this was no longer a family discussion, but a formal confrontation with serious legal implications. Maria introduced herself to everyone present and explained that she had been retained to investigate irregularities in the business relationship between Isabella and me. Her calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the emotional tension that had been building throughout the evening. Isabella's reaction to Maria's presence was immediate and telling. Instead of welcoming legal clarification of issues she claimed were misunderstood, she became hostile and defensive. She demanded to know why I had involved attorneys in what should have been a private family matter. Her response confirmed everything I suspected about her awareness of wrongdoing. Someone who had acted legitimately would have welcomed legal review to clarify misunderstandings. Someone who had been systematically stealing would react exactly as Isabella was reacting, with anger, defensiveness, and attempts to control the narrative. Maria began presenting evidence in her characteristic methodical style, explaining each document and its legal implications in language that everyone present could understand. She started with the trademark applications Isabella had filed, explaining how they attempted to give her exclusive rights to use my name and likeness for commercial purposes without my authorization. The patent applications were followed by copyright claims for choreography and video content I had created entirely independently. Isabella had been building a legal framework that would give her ownership of every aspect of my creative work, from my personal brand to the specific dances I performed. Most damaging were the contracts Isabella had negotiated with sponsors and partners, agreements that positioned her as my exclusive representative with authority to make binding decisions about my career. These contracts included provisions that would have made it nearly impossible for me to terminate her representation or work with other management. Kevin's face grew increasingly pale as Maria explained the legal implications of each document. As Isabella's husband, he would have been aware of at least some of these business activities. His reaction suggested either complete ignorance of Isabella's actions or horrified realization of their legal and ethical implications. Elena asked pointed questions about the financial aspects of Isabella's management, wanting to understand how much money had been diverted from my earnings into accounts I couldn't access. Maria's response included specific dollar amounts that made everyone in the room gasp with shock. Over the previous 8 months, Isabella had redirected more than $300,000 from my earnings into business accounts she controlled exclusively. The amount was staggering, representing the majority of revenue generated by my content during the period she had been managing my career. Marcus spoke from the screen, his voice barely controlled. Isabella, how can you justify taking that much money from Mom's work? Even if you were doing legitimate management, 30% would be $90,000. Where did the rest of the money go? Isabella's response revealed the full extent of her sense of entitlement. She explained that building a successful social media brand required significant investment in equipment, marketing, legal services, and professional development. She claimed that her 30% management fee was separate from reimbursement for business expenses she had covered on my behalf. The explanation was superficially reasonable but fundamentally dishonest. Isabella had been double-dipping, taking management fees while also charging the business for expenses that should have been covered by those fees. She had also been inflating expenses and including personal costs that had nothing to do with my career. Most egregiously, she had been taking management fees on revenue streams she had never disclosed to me, earning commissions on partnerships and opportunities I wasn't even aware existed. The full scope of her financial theft was breathtaking in its audacity and sophistication. Kevin finally spoke, his voice shaking with what I hoped was anger rather than fear of personal liability. "Isabella, did you discuss any of this with me? Because I never approved of taking money from your mother's work, and I certainly didn't know you were claiming ownership of her intellectual property." Isabella's response to her husband was revealing. Instead of explaining her actions or defending their legitimacy, she attacked him for questioning her decisions in front of the family. She claimed that he had always been supportive of her career ambitions and shouldn't undermine her now when facing unfair accusations. Her reaction suggested that Kevin might indeed be innocent of direct involvement in her scheme. His shock and anger appeared genuine, and his immediate distancing from her actions indicated that he was learning about many of these details for the first time. Maria concluded her presentation by explaining the legal remedies available to address Isabella's unauthorized use of my intellectual property and theft of my earnings. The options ranged from civil litigation to recover damages, to criminal charges for fraud and identity theft, to immediate injunctive relief to prevent further unauthorized use of my work. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what had been revealed. Isabella had not just made poor business decisions or taken excessive management fees. She had systematically stolen my identity, my work, and my earnings to build a business empire that excluded me from ownership or control. Isabella's final defense was both predictable and pathetic. She claimed that everything she had done was motivated by love and concern for my well-being. She insisted that her management had made me successful in ways I could never have achieved independently. She demanded credit for sacrificing her own career to build mine. The appeal to family loyalty and gratitude might have been effective months earlier, when I still trusted her motivations and believed her explanations. But after months of investigation and evidence gathering, I could see her manipulation tactics clearly. Isabella hadn't sacrificed her career to build mine. She had stolen my career to replace the one she had abandoned. Every expression of concern for my well-being had been calculated to maintain control over a business asset she was systematically looting. Every family bond she appealed to had been corrupted by her greed and sense of entitlement. I looked directly at her, this daughter I had loved and trusted completely, and spoke the words that would end our relationship forever. "Isabella, you are no longer welcome in my home, my business, or my life. I want you to leave immediately, and I never want to see you again." The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Isabella stared at me as if she couldn't comprehend what I had said. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand, her support giving me strength to maintain my resolve. Marcus nodded from the screen, his expression showing both sadness and determination. Kevin stood up slowly, his face reflecting the devastating realization that his wife was not the person he had thought he married. He spoke quietly to Isabella. "We need to go home. We need to talk privately about what happens next." Isabella gathered her equipment with shaking hands, her confident facade finally cracking to reveal the desperation and fear underneath. As she reached the door, she turned back and made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "you're making a terrible mistake. You need me to manage your career. Without my help, you'll lose everything we've built together." The threat was empty, and we both knew it. I had already begun rebuilding my social media presence independently, and the response from my audience had been overwhelmingly positive. I had reconnected with sponsors and partners who preferred working directly with me, rather than through Isabella's aggressive management style. Most importantly, I had rediscovered the joy and authenticity that had made my content valuable in the first place. Isabella's polished but hollow approach had been slowly destroying the very qualities that made my work appealing to audiences. "I'll take that risk," I responded. "I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed as a prisoner in someone else's version of my life." Isabella left without another word, Kevin following behind her with a shell-shocked expression that suggested his own life was about to be turned upside down by these revelations. After they were gone, Elena, Marcus, and I sat in stunned silence, processing the emotional devastation of what had just occurred. I had successfully exposed Isabella's betrayal and reclaimed control of my career, but the victory felt hollow and painful. Maria wrapped up the video conference by outlining next steps in the legal process. We would file formal charges, pursue asset recovery, and ensure that Isabella could never again use my name or work for her own benefit. The process would take months and would likely destroy any possibility of future family reconciliation. Elena stayed with me that night, understanding that I needed family support to process the magnitude of what had just happened. We talked until dawn about Isabella's betrayal, about the signs we had missed, about how someone we loved could have been capable of such systematic deception. The confrontation was over, but the real work of rebuilding my life was just beginning. I had reclaimed my career, my identity, and my autonomy, but I had lost a daughter in the process. The price of freedom had been higher than I could have imagined, but it was a cost I was willing to pay. Never again would I allow anyone to assume control over my work, my voice, or my story. The battle had been exhausting and emotionally devastating, but it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. I was no longer the trusting, naive woman Isabella had been manipulating for months. I had become someone she never expected me to be. A formidable adversary who understood exactly what she had stolen and was prepared to fight for every piece of it. The war was over, and I had won more than just legal victory. I had won back myself. The aftermath of the confrontation brought both relief and an unexpected emptiness that settled into my bones like winter cold. For months, my life had been consumed by the need to expose Isabella's betrayal and reclaim what she had stolen. Now that the immediate battle was over, I found myself facing the more complex challenge of rebuilding not just my career, but my entire understanding of family, trust, and my own judgment. The legal proceedings moved forward with efficient brutality. Maria's team had built an airtight case, and Isabella's attorneys quickly realized that fighting the charges would only increase her financial liability and potential criminal exposure. Within 2 weeks of our confrontation, they approached us with settlement offers that would have seemed generous if they weren't returning money that had belonged to me in the first place. I rejected the first 3 settlement proposals, not out of vindictiveness, but because they failed to include adequate accountability for the scope of Isabella's deception. I wanted more than financial restitution. I wanted acknowledgement that what she had done was wrong, and I wanted safeguards that would prevent her from attempting similar schemes with other vulnerable people. The investigation had revealed that Isabella's exploitation of my work was part of a larger pattern of manipulative behavior. Maria's team had uncovered evidence that she had previously attempted to gain control over financial assets belonging to Miguel's elderly parents, using her nursing background to position herself as their concerned caregiver, while gradually assuming authority over their medical and legal decisions. Miguel's parents had died before Isabella's schemes could fully mature, but the preliminary steps she had taken revealed a calculated approach to exploiting vulnerable family members that was chillingly familiar. The woman I had trusted with my career had been systematically identifying and targeting people whose age, circumstances, or emotional state made them susceptible to manipulation. Kevin filed for divorce 3 weeks after the confrontation, citing irreconcilable differences but privately sharing with family members that he couldn't remain married to someone capable of such systematic deception. His own investigation of their joint finances had revealed that Isabella had been hiding assets and manipulating their personal accounts in ways that put his financial security at risk. The dissolution of Isabella's marriage provided additional evidence for our legal case, while also eliminating any possibility that Kevin had been complicit in her actions. His cooperation with our attorneys and his willingness to testify about Isabella's behavior patterns strengthened our position considerably. Marcus struggled with the emotional complexity of supporting my legal action while grieving the sister he thought he had known. His weekly phone calls became a lifeline for both of us, providing space to process the betrayal while maintaining family connections that Isabella's actions had threatened to destroy permanently. Elena moved in with me temporarily, ostensibly to help with the practical aspects of rebuilding my business, but actually to provide the emotional support I needed during the darkest period of this ordeal. Having someone who understood the family dynamics and could witness my recovery helped me maintain perspective when self-doubt or grief threatened to overwhelm my resolve. The response from my online community during this period was both surprising and deeply moving. Instead of being confused or alienated by the business dispute that had disrupted my content schedule, my followers rallied around me with support that went far beyond mere audience engagement. Many of them shared their own stories of being exploited by family members, business partners, or romantic relationships, where trust had been systematically abused for financial gain. The comments section of my videos became a support group for people who had experienced similar betrayals, creating connections and resources that extended far beyond my original content focus. This community response helped me understand that my willingness to fight back against Isabella's exploitation had broader significance than just personal recovery. By refusing to accept victim status and pursuing accountability through legal channels, I was modeling resistance that encouraged others to examine their own situations and demand better treatment. Several followers reached out privately to share that my story had motivated them to challenge questionable business arrangements, demand transparency in family financial matters, or seek legal advice about relationships where they felt manipulated or controlled. Their messages reinforced my conviction that pursuing justice had been the right choice, regardless of personal cost. The social media platforms where I had rebuilt my presence showed remarkable growth during this period, with engagement rates and follower counts exceeding anything Isabella had achieved through her manufactured approach. The authenticity and vulnerability I shared while processing this experience resonated with audiences in ways that polished performance could never match. Brands and sponsors who had worked with me through Isabella's management began reaching out directly, expressing relief at being able to negotiate with me personally, rather than through her aggressive and often dishonest representation. Several mentioned that they had been uncomfortable with Isabella's tactics, but had tolerated them because they valued the opportunity to work with my content. These conversations revealed another dimension of damage Isabella's management had caused. Her approach to business relationships had been extractive and short-sighted, prioritizing immediate revenue over sustainable partnerships. She had alienated potential sponsors, made unreasonable demands, and created reputation problems that I was now having to repair. Rebuilding these professional relationships required patience and transparency that Isabella had never demonstrated. I had to acknowledge problems she had created while establishing new expectations for how I wanted my brand represented. The process was time-consuming, but ultimately resulted in partnerships that were more ethical and sustainable than anything Isabella had negotiated. 4 months after the confrontation, Isabella's legal team finally agreed to a settlement that met our requirements for accountability and restitution. The financial terms were substantial, including full repayment of diverted earnings, plus interest and damages. More importantly, the agreement included admissions of wrongdoing and permanent restrictions on Isabella's ability to use my name, image, or work. Isabella was required to publicly acknowledge that she had misappropriated my intellectual property and earnings without authorization. She was permanently enjoined from claiming any ownership interest in my work or attempting to represent me in any business capacity. The agreement also included reporting requirements that would alert authorities if she attempted similar schemes with other victims. The day the settlement was finalized, I felt an unexpected sadness alongside the relief and satisfaction. Legal victory was complete, and I had recovered most of what Isabella had stolen, but the daughter I had raised and loved was gone forever. The person who had replaced her was a stranger, whose capacity for manipulation and exploitation had destroyed any possibility of future relationship. Elena and I marked the occasion quietly, with a simple dinner and a toast to justice served and lessons learned. We didn't celebrate because the victory had come at a cost that made celebration feel inappropriate. Instead, we acknowledged that sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrificing relationships that we had assumed were permanent and unbreakable. The final legal documents included provisions for ongoing monitoring of Isabella's compliance with the settlement terms. If she violated any aspect of the agreement or attempted to resume unauthorized use of my work, the penalties would be severe enough to ensure criminal prosecution rather than just civil liability. Maria explained that these enforcement mechanisms were crucial because people who engage in systematic exploitation often view legal consequences as temporary obstacles rather than permanent deterrents. The agreement was structured to make any future violations so costly that Isabella would have strong incentive to find other ways to support herself. With the legal battles resolved, I could finally turn my full attention to rebuilding my career on my own terms. The alternative platforms I had developed during the conflict had grown into a substantial and engaged audience that appreciated authentic content over manufactured performance. I began experimenting with new formats and topics that Isabella had never allowed me to explore. Personal stories about grief and recovery, discussions about aging and authenticity, collaborations with other creators who shared similar values. My content evolved beyond pure dance performance, to include the full range of experiences and insights I wanted to share. The business structure I created was deliberately simple and transparent, with clear documentation of all financial arrangements and decision-making processes. I hired professional advisors for specific tasks, but maintained direct control over all major decisions. Never again would I allow anyone to assume authority over my work without explicit written agreements and ongoing oversight. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own instincts about people and situations. Isabella's manipulation had been successful, partly because I had ignored warning signs and rationalized concerning behavior out of love and family loyalty. My new approach prioritized healthy skepticism and verification over blind trust, even with people I cared about deeply. The woman who emerged from this experience was fundamentally different from the grieving widow who had started dancing in her living room 2 years earlier. I had discovered strengths I didn't know existed, developed skills I never thought I would need, and built relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependency or obligation. Isabella had intended to steal my identity and replace it with a manufactured version that served her purposes. Instead, her betrayal had forced me to discover who I really was beneath the roles of wife, mother, and victim that had previously defined my existence. The person I had become was someone I could respect and depend on, someone who would never again allow others to control her story. 6 months later, as I prepared to move into a new house that belonged entirely to me, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Isabella's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been inadvertently liberating, forcing me to develop independence and self-reliance I might never have discovered otherwise. The relationship with my daughter was permanently destroyed, but the relationships I had built with my online community, my legal team, and my own inner strength were more valuable than anything I had lost. I had learned that some prices are worth paying for freedom, authenticity, and the right to control your own destiny. The confrontation that had begun as an ending had actually been a beginning. The real Carmen Rodriguez was finally free to emerge, and this time, no one would be able to steal her away. 1 year later, I stood in my new studio apartment in Scottsdale, watching the sunrise paint the desert mountains gold through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was smaller than my old house, but every square inch belonged entirely to me. No hidden cameras, no manipulation, no one controlling my story except the woman I had fought to become. My phone buzzed with notifications from my latest video, a raw and honest reflection on rebuilding after betrayal. The comments were flooding in from around the world, people sharing their own stories of family deception, business exploitation, and the courage it takes to start over. What had begun as a personal battle had somehow become a beacon for others fighting similar wars. The Dancing Carmen authentic brand had grown beyond anything Isabella ever achieved. 3 million followers across platforms, all drawn to genuine content over manufactured perfection. Brand partnerships that respected my values, workshop bookings that filled months in advance, and a documentary deal that would share my story with an even wider audience. Isabella's name rarely came up anymore. The settlement money had allowed me to rebuild completely, while the legal restrictions ensured she could never again profit from my work. Kevin had remarried, a kind woman who understood the trauma of discovering that someone you trusted was systematically destroying your life. Even he seemed happier without the constant manipulation that had characterized his marriage. Marcus visited monthly now, our relationship stronger for having survived the truth about his sister. Elena had moved back to Tucson but called daily, her protective instincts finally at peace knowing I could defend myself. My family had shrunk but strengthened, built on honesty rather than obligation. The woman staring back at me from the studio mirrors was unrecognizable from the confused victim Isabella had been creating. 56 years old, financially independent, creatively fulfilled, and absolutely nobody's victim. I had learned that some betrayals, no matter how devastating, can become the foundation for something better than what was destroyed. My phone rang with an interview request from a major network, wanting to discuss my story for a segment about family financial abuse. I accepted immediately. Every time I shared what had happened, someone else found the courage to examine their own situation, to demand transparency, to refuse victim status. Isabella had tried to steal my identity and replace it with a manufactured version that served her purposes. Instead, she had forced me to discover who I really was beneath decades of putting others' needs first. The authentic Carmen was fiercer than the people-pleasing version, more resilient than the grieving widow, more valuable than the managed performer. That evening, I filmed a special video for my audience, dancing to Miguel's favorite song in my new studio. The routine was improvised, emotional, completely unscripted. It was everything Isabella had tried to control and commercialize, but now it belonged entirely to me. As I moved through the steps, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The phone call that shattered my trust, the months of investigation and legal battles, the confrontation that ended my relationship with my daughter forever. Each painful step had been necessary to reach this moment of complete authenticity and freedom. The video ended with me speaking directly to the camera, sharing a truth I had learned the hard way. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are actually stealing your life piece by piece. Sometimes fighting back means losing relationships you thought were permanent. Sometimes the price of freedom is higher than you imagined, but it's still worth paying. At 56, I had everything I needed: my art, my audience, my independence, and my self-respect. Isabella had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible by revealing her true nature early enough for me to fight back. I was dancing to my own rhythm now, and no one would ever steal that away again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.